Right now, somewhere in the world, a congregation is rising to their feet. The organ is swelling, and millions of voices are lifting a hymn that has stirred the souls of believers for centuries. Praise to the Lord, the Almighty, the King of creation. Maybe you have sung it yourself. Maybe it moved something deep inside you, something you could not explain, something that made you feel, if only for a moment, that heaven was closer than the ceiling above your head. But here is what nobody tells you. Here is the secret that has been buried for over 150 years underneath the polished pews and stained glass windows and the smiling faces of Sunday mornings. The reason that hymn reached your heart in the English language, the reason it makes you cry, the reason it makes you stand straighter, the reason it makes you believe is because of a woman. A woman who most Christians have never heard of. A woman who never stood at a pulpit. A woman who was never ordained. A woman who was never celebrated in her lifetime the way she deserved. A woman who labored in quiet rooms with ink-stained fingers and an enormous heart, while the world looked right past her. Her name was Catherine Winkworth, and before this story is over, I am going to tell you something about her life, something so profound, so quietly devastating, and so deeply inspiring that it will change the way you sing every single hymn for the rest of your life. Stay with me, because this story is going to go somewhere you are not expecting. Welcome to Her Faith Echoes, the channel that pulls forgotten women of faith from the shadows of history and places them exactly where they belong, at the center of the story. I am so glad you are here. If this is your first time joining us, please take a moment right now to subscribe and hit the notification bell, because every single week we bring you the stories of women whose faith moved mountains, even when no one was watching. And if you have been here before, you already know. We do not do surface level here. We go deep. We go real. We go into the places where the tears live. Now settle in, because today we are going back to the 19th century. We are going to Manchester, England. We are going to a world of drawing rooms and corsets, and women who were told in 1,000 different ways that their voices did not matter. And we are going to meet the woman who proved every single one of those voices wrong, not with a shout, but with a whisper, not with defiance, but with devotion. Her name was Catherine Winkworth, and her story, I promise you, will break your heart open and fill it back up again with something holy. She was born on the 13th of September, 1827, in the city of London, the second of 7 children in the Winkworth family. Her father, Henry Winkworth, was a silk merchant, a man of commerce, a man of the world. Her mother, Susanna, was warm and intellectually alive, a woman who believed deeply that her daughters should be educated, should be challenged, should be nurtured to think. And so from her very earliest years, Catherine Winkworth grew up in a household where books were not decorations on a shelf. They were breath. They were food. They were the furniture of the mind. She was, by every account, an extraordinary child, sensitive beyond her years, deeply observant, the kind of child who absorbs the emotional temperature of a room before she even walks through the door. She was not the loudest child. She was not the most boisterous. But those who knew her said there was something about Catherine, something in the way she listened, something in the way she turned a phrase, something in the way she seemed to understand things that other people had to struggle to reach, that made you feel, when you were around her, that you were in the presence of someone marked by God for something. The family moved to Manchester when Catherine was still young, and it was there, in that great industrial city, under skies often gray with the smoke of progress, that Catherine began her real education. Manchester in the mid-19th century was a city of contradictions. It was the engine of the British Empire, the heartbeat of the Industrial Revolution, but it was also a city of radical thinkers, of social reformers, of people who dared to ask whether the world as it was made was the world as it ought to be. and Catherine Winkworth was planted right in the middle of it. Her family attended a Unitarian congregation, and it was through this connection that Catherine came under the influence of one of the most important men in her intellectual formation, the Reverend William Gaskell. You may recognize that surname. Reverend Gaskell was the husband of the great novelist Elizabeth Gaskell, who would become one of Catherine's closest and most beloved friends. But William Gaskell himself was a scholar of extraordinary depth, a man who loved languages the way other men loved power, and who immediately recognized in young Catherine Winkworth a student whose gifts deserved to be taken seriously. He began to teach her German. Now I want you to pause here for just a moment and truly feel the weight of what I'm about to tell you, because this is not simply a detail of biography. This is the pivot point of an entire legacy. This is the moment when the thread that God had been weaving through Catherine Winkworth's life suddenly became visible. William Gaskell taught her German, and Catherine did not simply learn a language. She fell into it. She fell into it the way you fall into a love story, the way you fall into prayer. She discovered in the structure and music of the German language something that resonated with the deepest chambers of her soul. And she was not content merely to read German. She began, at a young age, to translate it. At the time, the German Lutheran tradition was one of the richest wellsprings of Christian hymnody in the entire world. For centuries, German-speaking Christians had written hymns of extraordinary power, hymns that had carried believers through plague and persecution and war and grief, hymns that were the soundtrack to faith in some of its most extreme and beautiful expressions. Martin Luther himself had written hymns. Johann Sebastian Bach had set them to music. Paul Gerhardt had written poetry of such shattering emotional depth that people wept when they sang it. The German hymn tradition was an ocean. It was a cathedral built not of stone, but of sound, and most English-speaking Christians had no idea it existed. This troubled Catherine deeply. She had tasted these hymns. She had felt what they did to the spirit. She had sat with their theology and their poetry and their raw, undefended emotion, and she had thought, I cannot be the only one who needs this. I cannot be the only English speaker who would be changed by these words. Someone has to build the bridge. Someone has to carry these songs across the water. And she decided quietly and with complete conviction that she would be the one. She was barely out of her teenage years when she began. She worked with extraordinary care and with a scholarly precision that belied her youth. Translation is never simply substitution. It is not a matter of swapping one word for another. Real translation, true translation, the kind that carries not just meaning but music, not just idea but feeling, demands that you enter so deeply into another language, another culture, another spiritual world, that you are almost absorbed by it. And then, having been absorbed, you must find your way back to your own language and rebuild what you found, brick by brick, note by note, syllable by syllable, so that what you give to your reader is not a foreign artifact, but a living experience. Catherine Winkworth did this with a genius that was almost impossible. She did not anglicize these hymns in ways that flattened them. She did not strip them of their theological weight or their emotional intensity. She honored the originals with fierce fidelity, even as she made them breathe naturally in the English tongue. She understood, perhaps better than anyone before her, that a hymn is not simply a poem. A hymn is a vessel. It carries the faith of the people who sing it, and if you damage the vessel in translation, you spill the faith. The first volume of her collection, called Lyra Germanica, was published in 1855. She was 27 years old. I want you to think about what that means. A 27-year-old unmarried woman in Victorian England, in a world that had very clear and very small ideas about what women were for, published a collection of translated German hymns that would go on to reshape the entire landscape of English Christian worship. She did not have a degree from Oxford. She was not ordained. She did not have powerful patrons announcing her. She had her faith, her languages, her pen, and a quiet, inexhaustible certainty that this work mattered. Lyra Germanica was an immediate sensation. It went through edition after edition. People could not get enough of it. Clergy who had never heard of Paul Gerhardt were now introducing his hymns to their congregations. Sunday school teachers were distributing Catherine's translations to children. Families were reading them aloud by firelight. And the voice that was doing all of this reaching, the voice that was, in a very real sense, speaking to every one of those readers, was Catherine's voice, even when no one knew it. Because that is the thing about translation. The translator is always present, but rarely credited. Every time you read a translated text, you are reading it through the filter of the translator's mind, the translator's sensibility, the translator's soul. Catherine Winkworth was inside every single one of those hymns she translated. Her understanding of theology, her ear for rhythm, her sensitivity to the emotional arc of a lyric, all of it was there, quietly shaping what English-speaking Christians felt when they opened their mouths and sang. But she was just beginning. The second volume of Lyra Germanica followed in 1858, and then in 1863 she published what many scholars consider her masterwork, Chorale Book for England. This was something even more ambitious, not just the texts of the hymns, but the music as well, paired together, presented in a form that congregations could actually use. She was not just giving English speakers the words of the German hymn tradition, she was giving them the whole experience, the theology, the poetry, the melody, the worship. Among the hymns she translated were some that would become cornerstones of English-language Christian worship. Now Thank We All Our God, a hymn written by Martin Ringart during the 30 Years' War, when pestilence was killing thousands and despair was the only rational response to life. And yet, from that darkness came a song of pure, defiant gratitude. Catherine's translation of it is so elegant, so perfectly calibrated, that most people who sing it today have no idea they are singing a 17th century German text that once helped survivors of catastrophe hold on to God. And then there is Praise to the Lord the Almighty, written in 1680 by Joachim Neander, a young German Reformed pastor who died at the age of 30, never knowing that his hymn would outlive him by centuries. When Neander wrote it, he was praising God from a place of personal experience. He had been through illness and hardship, and had come through them with his faith not just intact, but blazing. And when Catherine translated it, she did not just render it in English, she made it soar. She found the English words that matched not just the meaning, but the flight of the original. Praise to the Lord the Almighty, the King of creation. O my soul, praise him, for he is thy health and salvation. Can you feel that? Can you feel the way those words lift you? That is Catherine Winkworth. That is her gift to you. Think about how many times that hymn has been sung. Think about every wedding, every Easter service, every moment of joyful collective praise where those words have risen from thousands of throats at once. Think about the soldiers who sang it before battle, the grieving mothers who whispered it in the dark, the children who learned it before they understood what it meant, and who grew up carrying it as a kind of armor against despair. All of that, every single one of those moments, was made possible because a young woman in Victorian England sat down at a desk and decided that the English-speaking world deserved access to this beauty. And she did it without a salary, without a title, without an official position in any church, without the kind of public recognition that men in her position, had she been a man, would almost certainly have received. She lived simply, she lived faithfully, she poured herself into her work with a consistency and a depth that is almost breathtaking to contemplate, and she did it alongside a full life. Because Catherine Winkworth was not only a translator of hymns, she was a person, she was a friend, she was a daughter, a sister, a woman who moved through the world with warmth and intelligence and an irresistible quality that drew people to her. Her friendship with Elizabeth Gaskell was one of the great sustaining relationships of her life. They wrote to each other with the kind of trust and tenderness that only comes from years of genuine mutual understanding. Elizabeth saw Catherine's genius clearly and celebrated it without reservation. She was one of the voices who understood what Catherine was doing, not just as an act of scholarship, but as an act of faith, as an act of service, as an act of love toward a church that did not yet know it needed her. Catherine also cared deeply about the education of women. She was involved with the work of expanding educational opportunities for women in Bristol, where she lived for a significant part of her adult life. She served as secretary of the Clifton Association for Higher Education of Women, an organization dedicated to opening university-level education to women at a time when most of academia was closed to them entirely. This was not tangential to her other work, it was of a piece with it. Catherine Winkworth believed in the marrow of her bones that women had minds and souls and gifts that the world needed. She believed it because she had lived it, and she spent her energy not just on her own work, but on clearing the path for the women who would come after her. She never married. This was, by the standards of her time, a significant social fact. Victorian England had very definite ideas about what an unmarried woman was, either tragic or eccentric, either to be pitied or subtly mocked. The category of woman who chose not to marry because she had a vocation was not really one that the culture made space for. And yet, that is exactly what Catherine was. She had chosen, whether consciously or not, a life organized around work and friendship and faith. She had chosen the desk over the domestic sphere, the dictionary over the drawing room in its conventional sense, not because she was cold or unfeeling, but because she was on fire, because she had something to do that only she could do, because God had given her a particular combination of gifts, and she was going to use them completely, without apology, without explanation. There is something both painful and profoundly inspiring about this. The pain is real. Catherine Winkworth lived in a world that did not have adequate language for what she was. She was not celebrated as a theologian because women were not theologians. She was not celebrated as a church musician because women were not church musicians. She was not placed in the hierarchy of Christian scholarship because women were not placed in hierarchies. She was the invisible hand inside the glove. She was the breath that animated the song, without being the one who stood up to sing. But here is what I want you to hold on to. Here is the truth that Catherine Winkworth's life insists, even from a distance of 150 years. Hidden influence is still influence. Faithful labor without spotlight is still faithful labor. The fact that the world does not see you does not mean your work does not see you. Every time a congregation sings Praise to the Lord the Almighty, Catherine Winkworth is in that room. She has been in every room where that hymn has been sung for the past 160 years. She will be in every room where it is sung for the next 160 years, God willing. She is there in the music. She is there in the English words. She is there in the souls that are moved. That is not invisibility. That is a different kind of presence. It is the presence of someone who poured themselves so completely into a work of service that they became woven into it. And that is a kind of immortality that no amount of earthly recognition can create or destroy. In the later years of her life, Catherine continued her work with tireless dedication. She translated other German literature, contributing to a broader project of cultural and spiritual exchange between England and Germany at a time when such exchange was considered unusual and valuable. She continued her advocacy for women's education. She continued her friendships, her correspondence, her life of thought and faith, and quiet, purposeful action. And then, on the 1st of July, 1878, while on a journey to Switzerland, a place she loved, a place whose mountains and clarity she found restorative, Catherine Winkworth died suddenly of heart failure. She was 50 years old. Just 50 years. Half a century of extraordinary life, and then silence. The tributes that followed were warm but inadequate. People spoke of her scholarship. People mentioned her translations. A few noted her work for women's education, But the full weight of what she had done, the incomprehensible scale of her contribution to English Christian worship, was not truly understood, not in 1878, and arguably not for many decades afterward. Her books remained in circulation. Her translations continued to be sung. But Catherine Winkworth herself, the woman, the mind, the heart behind all of it, faded from the story. She became a footnote when she should have been a chapter. She became a credit line when she should have been a portrait on the wall. And here is the thing I promised to tell you. Here is the thing I said would change the way you sing every hymn for the rest of your life. Are you ready? In 1978, exactly 100 years after her death, the Episcopal Church in the United States added Catherine Winkworth to its calendar of lesser feasts and fasts. She was recognized, officially, as a holy woman, a woman worthy of commemoration, a woman who had served God faithfully and whose life was an example to the Church. But here is what the official calendar does not tell you. Here is what the dates and the formal language cannot capture. In the 100 years between her death and her commemoration, while Catherine Winkworth's name was being quietly forgotten, her words were not forgotten. Her translations were not forgotten. The hymns she gave the English-speaking world were being sung every single Sunday in churches across Britain and America and Australia and Canada and every English-speaking country on earth. They were being sung at funerals and at christenings. They were being sung in cathedrals and in tiny rural chapels. They were being carried in the hearts of missionaries to places Catherine had never been and could never have imagined. She was forgotten in name, but she was present in practice. The Church was using her work every week. The Church was shaped by her work in ways it could not articulate because it did not know who had done it. For 100 years, English-speaking Christians were worshiping with the vocabulary that Catherine Winkworth had given them, without knowing her name, without knowing her face, without knowing the story of the young woman who had sat down with ink and faith and the German language and decided that the world needed to hear these songs. I want you to sit with that for a moment. I want you to feel what that means. It means that faithfulness does not require recognition to be real. It means that work done in service of God and neighbor does not lose its power when the world forgets who did it. It means that Catherine Winkworth's labor was fruitful beyond anything she could have imagined, not despite being overlooked, but in ways that were completely independent of whether anyone was paying attention to her. The fruit was in the tree, whether or not anyone was looking. And it means something else, too, something that I think speaks directly to every woman watching this who has poured herself into work that has not been celebrated, every woman who has served faithfully in the background while others took the credit, every woman who has wondered whether her contribution matters when nobody seems to notice, every woman who has kept going, kept giving, kept laboring in love, not because the world was applauding her, but because she knew in the deep down place where faith lives that the work was real and the one who assigned it to her was watching. Catherine Winkworth's life says to you, yes, it is enough. The faithfulness is enough. The love is enough. The labor is enough. God sees what the world overlooks. And sometimes, not always in our lifetime, but sometimes the world catches up. She gave the English-speaking church its hymns. She built a bridge between the soul of German Lutheran piety and the hearts of millions of English speakers who would never have found their way across that divide without her. She did it as an unmarried woman in a world that did not have adequate language for what she was. She did it without a salary, without ordination, without a title that the church would recognize. She did it out of love, out of faith, out of an absolute conviction that beauty and theology and the music of genuine devotion belonged to everyone, not just to those who could read German. She did it, and then she died quietly in Switzerland at 50 years old, with perhaps no idea of the tidal wave of worship she had set in motion. But we know We know now, and knowing changes something. It changes the way we hear those hymns. It changes the way we think about the invisible hands behind the things we love. It changes the way we think about our own labor, the quiet, daily, faithful labor that the world may not see, but that God is building with, block by invisible block, towards something we cannot yet imagine. Catherine Winkworth was not a saint in the sense of someone who performed miracles or had visions of heaven. She was a saint in the most practical and beautiful sense, a person who used the exact gifts God gave her in exact service of God's people, without reservation, without self-promotion, without waiting for the world to tell her she had permission. She just did it. She just opened the book and picked up the pen and began. And the songs are still singing. They are singing right now in churches you have never visited, in countries you may never travel to. They are singing in languages other than English, because Catherine's translations themselves became source material for further translations into other tongues. They are singing in the hearts of people who have no idea that a 19th century Englishwoman with ink-stained fingers and an enormous soul put them there. They are singing at this very moment, somewhere in the world, as you listen to this story. Praise to the Lord, the Almighty, the King of creation. Now thank we all our God. Jesus, priceless treasure. Wake, awake, for night is flying. These are Catherine Winkworth's gifts to you, to all of us, from a woman who asked for nothing in return, because she was not doing it for return. She was doing it for love. She was doing it because she had been handed something beautiful and could not bear to keep it to herself. That is what faith looks like when it is stripped from performance and ambition and the need to be seen. That is what faith looks like when it is lived in the hidden place, in the quiet room, with the open book and the searching heart, and the unshakable certainty that the work is worth doing because God is worth everything. Catherine Winkworth's life says to you, yes, it is enough. The faithfulness is enough. The love is enough. The labor is enough. God sees what the world overlooks, and sometimes, not always in our lifetime, but sometimes the world catches up. So the next time you sing one of her hymns, and you will because they are everywhere, I want you to remember her name. I want you to take one breath before you open your mouth and use that breath to say silently to yourself, "This was given to me by a woman, a faithful woman, a forgotten woman, a woman whose love for God was so large that it outlived her by centuries and shows no sign of stopping." Her name was Catherine Winkworth, and her faith echoes still. Thank you so much for watching this story all the way to the end. If you felt something today, if this story moved you, if it stirred something in your faith, if it made you think differently about the hidden women whose work has shaped everything you believe, then I want you to do 3 things. First, share this video. Share it with every woman you know who was laboring faithfully without recognition. Share it with your church friends, your sisters, your daughters, because this story deserves to be heard. Second, subscribe to Her Faith Echoes right now if you have not already, because every week we bring you another story like this one, and you do not want to miss a single one. And third, leave a comment below and tell me, which hymn means the most to you? Which hymn has carried you through something hard? I want to know, because that hymn has a story too, and some of those stories lead back to women just like Catherine Winkworth, women whose names we never learned, but whose faith shaped our singing. Her faith echoes, because the stories of faithful women are never truly lost. They are only waiting to be found.